Right, people. I'm sitting here with a letter that was issued to by our friends at Revenue, issued to a client of mine, right? And it's about VDP. And I thought that it's important that we discuss some of the principles of VDP in light of this letter. So before I do that, I think it's important that we just be reminded of what happened in the Purveyors case. For those of you who operate in the tax space, knows about VDP, you'll know that the Purveyors case was a very important judgment about the meaning of the words disclosure and the meaning of the words voluntary in the context of voluntary disclosure program applications. Right. So just some context. What happened in that case, the taxpayer imported an asset, I think it was an airplane, if I remember the facts correctly, and the question was whether there was VAT on this importation. And eventually the taxpayer spoke to SARS about this after they'd imported the plane, and someone in SARS told them, I could be wrong on the facts, but it's not really that important, right, at a principal level. Somebody in SARS told them that yes, there's VAT on it, and because you didn't import it or didn't declare the VAT on it, there's going to be a penalty. Taxpayer subsequently applied for VDP relief, having now regularized or identified this default, which they now know is a default, and went for VDP relief, and SARS rejected the application. And SARS rejected the application ultimately on two grounds. One is that when the taxpayer and purveyors applied for VDP relief, the disclosure that was made, the disclosure in that application is not a disclosure, because a disclosure, you can't, the court in fact held in Purveyors that you can't disclose something to someone who already knows that thing that you're telling them about. So it's not a disclosure. The other party can't know about this thing. Otherwise it's not a disclosure. And that's one of the requirements for VDP. It must be, you must be telling SARS about something that they don't already know about. Right? The second thing was that the application, the second basis on which SARS rejected it was that the application is not voluntary. Right? A voluntary application being one brought out of true free will, right, without any element of compulsion underpinning it. And so the ultimate conclusion by the court was that in the Purveyors case, the taxpayer only brought this application for VDP relief out of fear of penalties, because you see, the SARS person or the SARS people they spoke to told them that there will be penalties. Right. And so ultimately the court held that SARS correctly rejected the VDP. So the rule of the law now is, I grant you on the facts and Purveyors, right? Not stupid, right? But be careful. Right. So now, two bases. One, disclosure must, for VDP to be valid, there must be a disclosure, or two of the requirements at least, there must be a disclosure, meaning the other person must know about it, in this case SARS, and two, it must be voluntary. Now enters this letter that was sent late last year, right? And I'm folding it so up because I'm afraid that if I disclose something, I might disclose something I shouldn't, and also say something I shouldn't. Right, so now, here's the letter. I'm going to read from it for you, and I won't make it available, obviously, right? But it says, from SARS, it says information, in fact, from the SARS VDP unit, no less. Right? It says information at the disposal of the South African Revenue Service indicates that deposits received in your bank account or accounts far exceed the gross income declared in your tax return. What does that suggest to you? It suggests to me that they know that you didn't declare something. I'm not defending the taxpayer, I'm talking about the principle. Right, so here's a letter, and then it goes on to say, after saying that they've got information, they go on to say, you're encouraged to submit a voluntary disclosure program application, make full and complete disclosure. Right, granted it says if you meet the requirements, I'll talk about that, if you meet the requirements, we'll give you VDP relief. But then it goes on. Now, you might say, right, you can see where my issue is with this. My issue with this is if I make a VDP in this, there's no disclosure, because SARS already knows about it, and I'm sure the counter argument is going to be, no, we're not saying the exact amount that wasn't declared. We don't know exactly. We have a hunch. We don't know exactly. But then it goes on to say, this letter, right? And I have to make sure that I just keep it folded. What am I showing here? No, nothing. So it says, it is important to understand that failure to comply with this notification will result in estimated assessments being issued. Right, so you know exactly what the numbers are, right? You know exactly what the numbers are. You know exactly what the default is according to you, right? So now my question to you is, if I go ahead and I comply, let's say my client in this case applies, or me for that matter, it's not me, right? But let's say my client applies for VDP relief. What disclosure could he or she possibly be making? Right? But then it goes on further. It says, in addition, understatement penalties may be imposed and criminal prosecution may be instituted. for failure to comply or to submit a document SARS is requested. Now, I ask you, the second thing in purveyors was voluntary. If this application is made, would it be voluntary? Right, it says here, in addition, you must tell us within 21 days if you intend to submit a VDP application. Right. Now, I don't get how this is different to purveyors at a principle level. How is this different? I know it's not exact amounts, but still you know about something. You know already. There's no disclosure. There's no disclosure in the circumstances because you threaten to make estimated assessments, and then you go on to say you're going to impose penalties. How is this voluntary? How is this any different? Why would a taxpayer in these circumstances be encouraged to submit a VDP application? And why should this VDP application be accepted if purveyors VDP application was rejected? It creates much uncertainty, I would say, in law, and I'm quite aggravated. It creates much uncertainty, or is it perhaps the opposite? Am I confusing things here? Is this a strategy? Is this a strategy to say submit and then we'll reject it because it's kind of an ambush? I refuse to believe that that's the case. I hope that's not the case, right? But it does create much uncertainty as to what are you going to consider now voluntary and what not, because this is confusing. Now, what must I do with this? Must I submit a VDP application or must I not submit a VDP application? It seems to me like this might be, and I'm speculating naturally because I don't know, but it seems to me that this might be one of those circumstances where we've got policy and policy drives compliance and policy drives collection of revenue. And so I grant you that it's much easier, to collect through voluntary compliance, to get taxpayers to come clean than to do the audit. Right, and so I get that makes sense from a policy perspective, but surely you can't choose where to apply purveyors and where not to. Or are you going to argue that there's scope for this because you're going to have to? Right, you're going to have to argue that there's scope for this and it's different to purveyors because it's not the exact amount and there are small nuances and those sorts of things. I think this creates confusion in law. I grant, look, it's great if we can get the taxpayers compliant, fantastic. For me, it's not about defending the taxpayer for not complying or trying to hide something. It's not about that. It's about certainty in law. I should know. And in fact, that's what the court said in Thistle as well. It was talking to the legislator, I grant you, the Constitutional Court, but there must be certainty in law, and this creates tremendous amount of uncertainty. Oh, look, but confusing. What must we do with this?